Hello, and thank you for joining today. Our webinar will begin shortly. We'll give everyone a moment to sign on. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a copy within the next few days. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar entitled Under Pressure, Exploring Validation High-Pressure Processing Technology. Hello, my name is Amanda Trujillo, Marketing Communications Specialist for Mary Nutrasciences, and I will serve as the moderator for today's webinar. As we get started and throughout today's webinar, we'll be collecting your questions to ask our experts at the end. So we have a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be emailed after the webinar. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation by typing them into the GoToWebinar chat on the control panel. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. If we do not answer your question, we will follow up with you after the webinar. On to today's webinar, which features our friends at Hyperbaric. Participants will gain a deeper understanding of utilizing high-pressure processing in validation studies. Food manufacturers are being asked more and more to provide scientific evidence of how effective their control measures actually are. Through process validation studies, the effectiveness of control measures can be determined. High-pressure processing is a non-thermal processing technique which applies extremely high pressure to inactivate microorganisms. HPP technology is becoming widely used as an alternative to traditional heat pasteurization to ensure food safety by inactivating foodborne pathogens. So our learning objectives today include pathogen inactivation by HPP, enhancing shelf life by high-pressure processing, and we are also going to learn about the products that benefit from HPP and the clean label benefit from high-pressure processing. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a copy within the next few days. So let's move on to a quick polling question before we begin. For this section, you should be seeing a question pop up on the screen. So the question we have today is, have you utilized high-pressure processing technology before? And so we have, yes, I currently use HPP technology. Yes, I have used HPP technology in the past. No, I have not used HPP technology, and I am not sure. So I'm going to give a few moments for you all to respond. And just click on the answer that matches your facility's profile the most. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share our answers So it looks like we have about 18% of our attendees today currently use HPP technology. 23% say they have used HPP technology in the past, and 55% say no, they have not used HPP technology. 4% are not sure. Thank you everyone for your participation on our poll today. Now to introduce you to our speakers on today's webinar. So today we have speaking Dr. Duan Salmon. He works as a research fellow for Mary Sciences. He specializes in food safety and quality, microbiological risk assessment, food safety regulations, thermal and non-thermal processes, challenge studies, shelf life studies, microbiological detection and identification, and preventive control of foodborne pathogens. He serves as the responsible official for the Mary Sciences Selected Agents and Toxins Program for Clostridium botulinum research studies. Dr. Salmon received his PhD in food science, emphasis in food microbiology from Kansas State University. Then we also have Dr. Gillian Dagan. She has joined Mary Sciences in May of 2015 and is responsible for growing our research services division that performs various research projects, including process validations, shelf life and challenge studies, and sensory and consumer insights testing. Over her 17-year career in the food industry, Gillian has served in a number of leadership positions at state and national levels and maintains a strong and varied professional network. Currently, Gillian serves SSPS Secretary and also serves as a member of the Higher Education Review Board for IFT. Gillian has an MBA and PhD from the University of Florida. Next, we have Dr. Benicio Sermon. He is an application specialist at Hyperbaric, high-pressure processing equipment manufacturer, where he provides technical HPP food processing assistance to customers and potential buyers, mainly located in the American continent. Benicio has more than 10 years of combined research and industry experience in HPP food processing. He holds a bachelor's of science degree in chemical engineering from the Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León and obtained his master's and PhD degrees in biotechnology at Tecnológico de Monterrey. So I am now going to hand it over to Dr. Erdogan Salmon.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay. And hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. The first part of the webinar will cover preventive control measures for microbiological risk mitigation and high pressure processing or HPP technology as preventive control. All right. A little difficulty with this slide. Okay, perfect. So food manufacturers are required to implement a food safety plan with preventive controls to reduce or eliminate microbiological hazards. A single control measure or a combination of multiple control measures can be used to control the hazard. Food safety plan should include hazard analysis and risk-based preventive control for the identified hazard. And preventive controls must be written, implemented, and validated for effectiveness in timely manner. High pressure processing can be a preventive control in the food safety plan. The food industry has the flexibility of choosing different interventions or technologies to control pathogens. Regardless of the process chosen, it is industry's responsibility to validate the preventive controls associated with the technology or process chosen. Validation is not a new concept for the food industry, but the technologies or interventions used to control microbiological hazards can be new, such as high pressure processing. Unless safe harbors or well-defined guidelines are available, such as PMO, pasteurized milk ordinance, or FSIS's heating and cooling guidelines for ready-to-eat meat products, preventive controls should be validated to provide scientific evidence that the hazard of concern is controlled. One way of doing that is running a validation study, which will provide a scientific evidence or answer if the process is achieving the desired food safety objectives. So in some cases, the product formula itself can be used as a preventive control or along with other processing parameters such as high pressure processing. High pressure process treated acid or acidified foods such as salad dressing or sauces can be a good example for that. In the case of these type of products, the pH and the high pressure processing may have synergistic effect to control pathogens and spoilage organisms during the treatment and during the shelf life. So when do we need to conduct a validation study if high pressure processing is identified as a preventive control? According to the final FSMA rule, food safety plan should be validated ideally before implementing. In other words, it needs to be validated when the first food safety plan is first designed. If that's not possible, it should be validated within 90 days of production. If that's not feasible either, then it needs to be validated within a reasonable time frame with written justification. If companies choose the last option, then they need to work with a qualified individual or process authority who prepares the food safety plan and provide the written justification for a time frame that exceeds that 90 calendar days. In some cases, food manufacturers may already have validated their preventive controls. However, they might need to validate or revalidate their process or product when we have new scientific or regulatory information. A typical example for that will be if a process was validated already for salmonella and the new regulation requires that E. coli is a risk as well, then the very same process needs to be validated for E. coli to provide scientific evidence. And in some other cases, if there's any significant change in process, product, storage, in some cases packaging material, then preventive control needs to be validated again. Not every change is considered significant, and a qualified individual or process authority should review the change and justify if the change is significant and requires a new study. High pressure process validations can be conducted in laboratory setting, in a pilot plant, or under commercial processing conditions in a food manufacturing plant. Each option has advantages and disadvantages. Laboratory trials can be helpful in terms of running multiple parameters, running multiple pathogens, in some cases, spoilage organisms as well. But one of the disadvantages of it is the scale-up issue, because mostly laboratory scale high pressure units are very small. In some cases, come up time or dwell time can be much longer or different than industrial size. It could be used for modeling to understand and define the critical limits, but it might have its own disadvantages. Pilot plants can be ideal compared to in-plant trials because pathogens are not recommended for in-plant trials because of high risk. But in a pilot plant setup, we can use real processing conditions and we can use pathogens and spoilage organisms. So designing an HPP validation study is not different from any other validation study. A qualified individual, process authority, industry expert, or experienced professional should design, conduct, and oversee the study. The study should be conducted under the worst case scenario. These are some of the parameters that should be considered when designing a study. If you have a product that has large pH variation, then you might need to validate the highest pH value for the validation study. If there is any preservative in the product, it should be validated under the lowest preservative level, or if there's an option for no preservative, then study has to be validated without preservatives. Same thing with moisture level. High pressure processing relies on the transfer of pressure through water molecules. So if we have a range of water activity or moisture, then it needs to be validated for the lowest value. Again, this is not too common, but if you are using multiple pressure values, then lowest pressure should be validated. And obviously, shortest time should be validated if there's a range in terms of treatment time. And these studies are product, formula, or ingredients and packaging specific. And it might not be used as reference for other products. Only time that these studies or the values can be used as reference if you have the very same formula, same product, same packaging material, but if you are going to use a different facility, different location, in that case, you can use the pressure and time parameters that you validated already and verify with the new equipment and location. In that case, then the data can be used as a reference. So Marine NutriSciences collaborates with Hyperbaric. Hyperbaric is one of the leaders in high pressure processing in the world. We have conducted multiple studies together to evaluate the effect of high pressure processing on the quality and safety of the products against vegetative pathogens and spoilage organisms and organoleptic properties of the products before, after, and during storage. Again, typical shelf life studies of different types of products. And most importantly, the effect of it on quality and safety of the product during storage. I wanted to emphasize that when we run any high pressure validation studies, we shouldn't be focusing on only before HPP treatment and after HPP treatment. HPP treated samples should be stored under typical storage conditions for during the desired shelf life and should be evaluated during storage as well to see if there's any effect that we might see later on during storage. This is for the pet food industry members. As far as pet food applications go, pet food processing is not different from human food processing. Only difference is the customer. So under the FDA's FSMA final rule, pet food manufacturers are also required to have a food safety plan and to validate their preventive control within their food safety plan. High pressure processing can be very useful in the food industry, especially for high moisture or fresh pet food products in flexible pouches. And it might not be very beneficial for dry products or low moisture products because of the nature of the technology. And high pressure has been used by different companies already for pet food products. And this part of the webinar aim to cover general overview of validation studies and preventive controls and high pressure processing application in general as a preventive control. This is rather a very large topic, large subject to cover in a short period of time. So I wanted to share this slide with everyone. Recently, we published an article, review article, in May 2021 to provide guidance for the industry in terms of how to design a validation study, how to determine lethal control measures, and determine pathogen of concern and hazards, and how to really start and finish a validation study from beginning all the way to the end. I highly suggest that you download this article, which is free. You can download it from the internet using this link, and you will see a lot of useful information in this article in terms of different questions that you might have for validation studies and preventive controls, as well as high pressure processing. And that concludes my presentation, and I believe Gillian will be next. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gillian Dagan, and I will be talking about some of the organoleptic properties that we see during high pressure processing. So when my teams at Marion NutraSciences look at using any type of processing, whether it be thermal, whether it be high pressure processing or an alternative method, we really try to take a very holistic approach to evaluating the success of the method. So of course that goes into microbiological reduction, since we're looking for either pathogen reduction or we're looking for an extension of shelf life. But we're also taking into account things like aroma and flavor stability in the food, any textural changes, color changes that may be unexpected. And then even, especially when we get into comparing things like high pressure processing to thermal inactivation, are we inactivating or are we enhancing functional enzymatic properties? And of course, those can affect color and sometimes separation of a food. So we really try to look at all of those different aspects, and some we look at from an instrumentation aspect where we can look at instrumental color, we can use texture analyzers to look at texture, and we also look at some of the sensory attributes using consumer studies as well, so getting that consumer acceptability. So today what I wanted to kind of walk through with you is some of the most recent research done on using high pressure processing, and we're going to talk about a variety of different foods. I think what you'll see as we walk through these research projects is that there really is a goal of balancing different techniques to extend shelf life and to ensure that we have a tasty, delightful food at the end. So you'll see that some combine high pressure processing alone. They'll combine it with packaging technologies. They will modify temperature during processing. So there's going to be a variety of things we're going to talk about. And I think the biggest takeaway is that you have to understand the matrix makes all the difference. So we will see very, very good success in some foods. In some foods, you're going to see different challenges that may not be expected. So again, it's really about looking at a food holistically, finding a team that can do that for you, and weighing all of those aspects when you think about the success of an alternative pasteurization or shelf life extension method. So the first thing we're going to look at, smoothies. A lot of work has been done on smoothies for high pressure processing, really looking to extend microbial shelf life, and also trying to use HPP to ensure that very, very fresh-like flavor. So in this study, I'm not going to read through all of the different processing parameters, but you have them here. So this was HPP versus a mild heat treatment. They did see that fresh-like flavor last for the first 14 days, and 14 days on a smoothie I think is pretty good. We also saw HPP resulted in a higher retention of vitamin C, but not necessarily all of our phenols and flavonoids. And we also saw a slight increase in how fast sucrose was being degraded into glucose and fructose during storage. So we know that there are some enzymes at play there. Again, I think this is a good example of balancing, if you're trying to ensure flavor, if you can do the 14-day shelf life, HPP looks like a really good alternative to thermal pasteurization in this case. So in juices, two examples here. So sugarcane juice has a very, very short shelf life. We see a lot of fermentation spoiling that product, and also a lot of enzyme activity. So this was, again, HPP versus a conventional thermal treatment. They presented the samples to consumers and asked about acceptability of the product. Acceptability was much higher, significantly higher in HPP juice compared to the thermal samples. And just to kind of give you an idea, under refrigeration, the high pressure process samples had a shelf life of 100 days versus 45 days for pasteurized juice. So sugarcane juice, excellent technology. Other researchers looked at clarified cucumber juice. And as you can imagine, something like that, that really has, no opacity, little to no color, you're worried about color change during any type of processing. So they saw significantly less color change under high pressure processed juice rather than using a thermal treatment. The clarity stayed higher, and they believe that the fresh color, the heightened clarity also resulted in their higher overall acceptability scores at 95% confidence. All right, so changing gears from smoothies and juices, let's talk about cold smoked salmon. So as we know, cold smoked salmon, ready to eat food. However, there is a Listeria monocytogenes concern there because there's no, guaranteed kill step. In previous research that has been done with cold smoked salmon, discoloration has been something that they've observed with high pressure processing. So in this study, the researchers decided to combine, not only use the high pressure processing, but combine that with the addition of nisin for microbial inactivation, and make sure that they did this processing at freezing temperature, so -30°C. So made a really, strong point to have temperature control during the HPP processing. And as you can see, processed in an ice slurry with an insulated sleeve, so the product stayed very, very cold. I've given you some of the log reductions on the Listeria innocua, so successful as far as inactivation there. And then if we start looking at the quality parameters, the low temperature, high pressure processing showed a smaller increase in lightness in cold smoked salmon compared to ambient temperature high pressure processing. So we know that the addition of the temperature control was important. The only, I would say, maybe quality concern that it still didn't affect their sensory scores. They saw that the peelability, so literally the ability for you to peel off a slice of the cold smoked salmon, was slightly reduced during the high pressure processing, but overall, treating at both 450 and 600 megapascals with the addition of nisin at these very, very cold temperatures, the high pressure processed samples were preferred, over 60% of the time by panelists, and that's at 95% confidence. So, as far as presenting it to a customer, that end product, they were satisfied more often than not. All right, so let's talk about cheese and kind of cheese texture. So 2 studies are profiled here, one on Gorgonzola. They actually inoculated cheese rinds and processed them with high pressure processing. And then the control was a non-processed control. They did show a reduction in Listeria monocytogenes. That's a very significant one at 10 minutes, and then even more significant at 15 minutes. So proving again that HPP was useful in inactivating that pathogen. Even more interestingly, processing whole Gorgonzola cheese at those same parameters, a panel of 18 members judged the treated and untreated cheeses in a triangle test. If you're not familiar with the triangle test, that is where we would bring in a group of judges or consumers and show them 3 samples, and only one of those samples is different. So that's why it's called a triangle test, because there's 3 points. You're supposed to pick the odd man out. So only 1 out of the 4 pressurized cheeses was evaluated as different from the untreated sample. So 3 out of 4 times, they couldn't tell the difference between pressurized and non-pressurized cheese. When we look at mature raw goat milk cheese, these researchers evaluated the use of high pressure processing at 400 and 600 megapascals to look at not only Listeria, but also spoilage organisms, so extending that shelf life. It was interesting, the objective measures of texture showed differences between control and high pressure processed samples, but when they presented the samples to even trained panelists, they presented to trained panelists and to consumers, they really did not find significant differences between the control and the high pressure treated cheeses. I thought this was interesting because a lot of times our trained panel at Mariu will correlate well with objective measures of texture, but I think cheese is an interesting case only because with all of the different styles of cheeses out there, and even if you have 2 or 3 of the same style of cheese made by different people, there's still going to be variability in something like texture or creaminess, just because there are different styles of cheese out there. So I think there's a little bit more wiggle room, but again, HPP proving out that it was equal, if not a little bit better than traditional processing, or no processing at all. All right, so shifting gears into meat quality, pork and lamb, and I shared these 2 cases because I feel like you might think, well, kind of what's the difference between looking at high pressure processing on pork versus lamb? And in the research, we do see that, one meat doesn't necessarily translate to the other. So in the pork research, high pressure processing was used, and they looked at postmortem metabolism and pork quality. So they split hogs in half. Half was treated with high pressure processing versus a control that was not treated. In looking at postmortem metabolism, they're looking at the amount of lactic acid that's in the muscle at that point. They actually saw lower muscle lactate levels, so less of that lactic acid, and higher pH values, which is going to translate into better meat quality. I thought a really interesting, fantastic bonus is that cook and drip loss were both reduced in high pressure processing. And you know how important that is in the meat industry, because you are selling, price per pound. And then HPP treated sides were more tender than controls, even when they had a similar collagen content. So from what this research group showed, HPP looked like a very viable processing alternative for pork. Now, on the other hand, the folks that did the lamb research did have a little bit more, I would say, challenges on their hands. They noted discoloration when lamb loins were processed at 400 and at 600 megapascals. T-bars, which is a chemical measure of oxidation, also increased with pressures. Depending on, what they saw was kind of the higher the pressure, the more oxidation that happened in the fat of the lamb. They also monitored saturated fatty acid and polyunsaturated fatty acid content decreasing with a pressure increase, which is interesting. And overall, between the increased oxidation, the discoloration, when they presented their samples to sensory panelists, a lot of those high pressure process samples were associated with browned or livery or oxidized flavors. So I think as far as the lamb goes, maybe going back to the drawing board on processing parameters, possibly using solid temperature control during that processing might be another option. So I think there's just a little bit more work that needs to be done on lamb. All right, and finally sausage. I put sausage in here, and I'm kind of taking it on a separate page from the whole muscle meats. We've seen a lot of success with the use of high pressure processing in ready-to-eat lunch meats. And so I wanted to include the sausage aspect as well, just kind of as another type of meat product. So these were vacuum packed cooked sausages. So again, fully cooked, but using high pressure processing as a shelf life extension. They compared sausages treated at 500 megapascals for 5 or 15 minutes at 65 degrees, so some temperature control there, versus treating them with a conventional heat pasteurization. As far as what they saw with the high pressure process samples, color attributes did not change. So that was a good sign. HPP sausages actually did experience some textural changes. They became more cohesive and less firm than a heat-treated sausage. It was interesting when they did present that to the sensory panel. The sensory panel did not detect differences between the two, but so they asked a difference question first, but then when they went back and asked a preference question, more times the panel preferred the high pressure process sample. They liked the appearance, and then especially they did note texture. So that the fact that they did become more cohesive and less firm than a heat-treated sausage was preferred in this panelist group. And then finally, pressure treatment induced a higher yield than heat treatment. So kind of just akin to what we saw in the pork, where we talked about there was a higher cooked yield, there was a lower drip loss. I think it's important to note, again, a higher yield in a product is definitely something to consider when looking at shelf life extension and pasteurization. So kind of overall best practices, again, thinking about optimizing processing case by case. Sugar, cane juice, and pork sausage are not going to behave the same way. They're not even going to have the same things to consider. So when thinking about evaluating HPP, take that holistic approach. Think about all of the different quality aspects of the food. Find a group to work with that can measure things objectively, can measure things subjectively using sensory panels so you get that full picture. And then also, I think, consider how you're going to high pressure process. Are you going to have a functional package there? Are you going to have temperature control? Are you going to combine high pressure processing with some additional antimicrobial or microbial inhibitory factor where you could almost lessen your processing and really optimize for product quality as well. And then finally, I mean, my biggest takeaway in reading through this research and doing all of the work we've done for clients on evaluation of process and package is really take it to the consumer. Find a group to work with that can do consumer studies, that can use sensory to give you some really good, strong, actionable data so you can predict how well that product is going to perform in the market. All right, so I'm going to be handing it over to Vinicio.
Yes, thank you, Gillian, and hello, all the attendees. Thank you again, Mariu, for the invitation. And well, so far we have seen some of the general overview, the technical aspects of the HPP. It's my turn on, and my pleasure to present an overview of the commercial applications for the high pressure processing technology, the HPP. First, I just want to briefly introduce Hyperbaric, the company in which I work. So Hyperbaric was founded in 1999. Since 2005, it became and established itself as the leader HPP equipment supplier throughout the world. With nearly 60% of installed units, it's very likely that you are using one of Hyperbaric units in all countries. And it's not just a casualty. So this is because the company heavily invests in terms of R&D, 7 to 10% of the annual revenue. Everything from, well, upgrading, of course, the HPP machines to make it more reliable, more efficient, to research projects related to food processing. So that's Hyperbaric. In terms of the HPP technology, well, like it's perhaps the non-thermal processing technology that's most widely available, and it's no coincidence as well. So it's provides a very good balance between what consumers seek in terms of natural and premium quality products, and they match those accordingly with what processors are looking in terms of safety and shelf life extension. So when compared to other technologies, it's very easy to use. So pressure transmission is uniform, instantaneous throughout the food vessel and the product. So that also helps you to develop new R&D products relatively fairly easy. We jump with some examples in terms of the effect of lethal effects on microorganisms. Over here we have on the charts on the left, inactivation of common foodborne pathogens, Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella in avocado and guacamole products, applying 6,000 bars for 3-minute holding time, which is kind of the standard for the HPP industry. It works very well for a amount of products such as well, avocado, juices, meats, and it is a good starting point when you are starting to develop your new products. But over here you can see with these standard HPP conditions, you can exceed the 5 log reductions needed for as a food safety standard. Likewise, you can see over here spoiled microorganisms, total plate count, lactic acid bacteria, microbial quality indicators. They are reduced to non-detectable levels and remain this way through 45-day shelf life storage. So they do not recover, and again, it's an extended shelf life. In terms of the quality, the nutritional and sensory quality, over here on the left, you can see a plot over here, the sensory profiles for a juice that's freshly squeezed, juice that has been just processed with HPP. And you can see that's barely a difference between the both. It's the same profile before and after the treatment. And on the right, you can see that HPP can actually favor or extract some of the nutritional compounds of interest, polyphenols, anthocyanins, or concentrations remain basically the same before and after the HPP. So again, this is one of the main reasons that consumers perceive these foods as premium or greater quality. So Erdogan and Gillian already touched a little bit on this, that pressure level, it's the effect or the variable that exerts the most lethal effects in terms of microbial and enzymatic inactivation. Most processes takes place over here between the 4,500 or maybe 5,000 bar to the 6,000 bar, which would be equivalent to the 72,000 psi to the 87,000 psi. In order to keep this commercially feasible, holding times range up to 6 minutes, again with 6,000 bars and 3 minutes like the standard recipe or the starting point. You can use lower pressure levels, particularly for seafood processing, shocking, the extraction of the whole edible portion of crustaceans or bivalves such as oysters, lobsters. And you can see the operation range in terms of the temperature is room temperature, 4 to 25 Celsius, 40 to 75 Fahrenheit. And this is one of the main reasons by which you see minimal effects in terms of the nutritional and sensory properties of HPP foods. Regarding food parameters, as in any other intervention, the more acid the food, the more chance that you have a longer shelf life. So it's a synergy between pressure, high pressure processing and the pH. HPP can be used to process low acid foods as well, but in this case, there's also limitations for technology. The most important in terms of safety will be that HPP does not eliminate bacterial spores. So as such, well, you need to incorporate additional control measures, particularly for Clostridium botulinum, either by adding natural antimicrobials, such as the smoked salmon example that Guillaume presented with niacin, or use high packaging with high oxygen transfer rate, as in some seafood applications. So water activity, it's, you know that the lower the water activity, the greater the shelf life, but it doesn't work well with HPP. So we're looking particularly as a 0.96, 0.97 water activity level, like the threshold in which you can actually maximize the lethal effects of HPP. Below this value, and actually in a relatively close range, 0.80 through 0.96, 0.97, HPP is best suited as a post-lethal intervention, like in the case of ready-to-eat sliced deli meats that are already being cooked, and you just apply HPP in order to prevent the recontamination risk associated with listeria and extend the shelf life by inactivating spoilage microorganisms. Another example of will be the combination of HPP with other intervention technologies, such as the elaboration of a dry cured salami, or a dry salami. So the fermentation steps eliminates perhaps 1 to 3 log reductions of the pathogens. With HPP, you apply another 1 to 3 log reductions of the pathogens, and by combining both approaches, you can meet the food safety objectives. So overall, well, again, it's very variable in terms of the shelf life extension. The days you can achieve depends on the formulation, everything between 21 to 40 days perhaps for low acid foods, all the way from 45 to 120 or even greater shelf life in refrigeration, as in the case of some juice shots, very acidic juices. And we now shall see some of these commercial applications. In terms of the distribution, well, you can see that juices and beverages comprise nearly 25% of the installed HPP capacity in terms of volume capacity throughout the world, regardless of vendors. That's our estimate. This is followed closely by the meat products with around 20% if you include also pet food products. Avocado and other plant-based products make up another 18–20%. And you can see that there are also applications for seafood, ready meals, and dairy products at a smaller percentage, but very interesting applications. The other major sector will be the HPP tolling, which we will be covering. So companies basically buy several HPP units and provide a service for companies that cannot afford to buy an HPP equipment. So we start right with avocado products, guacamole, derivatives, which was actually the first commercial applications here in the United States by the late 1990s. There was a restaurant that was close to the border with Mexico in Texas that imported avocado from Mexico 1 or 2 times per week by plane, frozen avocado. So even though it was very expensive, well, the demand for the avocado product justified this. And that's when they actually found in a conference that HPP can actually be helpful. And nowadays it's part of the standard within the avocado industry. With HPP, you eliminate foodborne pathogens, as we just saw, Listeria monocytogenes, Salmonella, and you can also use it to slow down enzymes related to the undesired quality changes of avocado. That will be the case of polyphenol oxidase, PPO, lipooxygenase, LOX, and while these enzymes might induce color changes, the browning in terms of the PPO, the LOX, well, it induces sour or rancid flavors, and they are actually the ones that delimit the shelf life. So even though HEP is not sufficient to completely eliminate or inactivate these enzymes, it is sufficient to yield a 30 to 45 day shelf life for a pure avocado puree, and in the case of guacamole, in which you combine the avocado with lemon juice, tomato, onions, etc., you can get up to 75 days in refrigeration. So you can see also the different types of presentations, everything from pouches, which can go to individual portions, a couple of grams, all the way to 10 kilograms. Actually, you can go and fill 90% of the vessel capacity in one big pouch, as in the case of the new equipment developed by Hyperbaric, the Hyperbaric bulk for juice processing. But in this case, it's more challenging to remove the oxygen in such a thick product like avocado paste, and that is also relative or very sensitive to oxygen. So that's why it's mostly limited to 10 kilograms, but you can go a larger size if it fits into the HP unit. You have trays, rigid or semi-rigid, as well as tubs, which are sealed on the top in order to be processed with the HEP. In this case, the Holy Guacamole, which was the first company that started with guacamole and avocado products in the USA, they also incorporate some tortilla chips immediately after HEP, so that it is very convenient for the consumers. We have flexible packaging, including with fittings in order to squeeze the product and for easy dispensing. And even though it's a little bit more challenging because the avocado fruit needs to be in a very precise maturation stage, but you can actually do avocado halves over here on trays. Or in this case, you have a rigid packaging that has the shape of the avocado half, and that protects them for not only against HPP, but also during the handling before the process and during transportation, which sometimes just operators just throw the packages away. So it protects the avocado half this way. Right along with the avocado, well, there was also fresh salsas, Mexican style. You can see a couple of examples here. The typical pico de gallo, which is tomatoes, cilantro, onions, lemon, and other spices. You also have some low-calorie dips or dressings, such as this one developed by Good Foods, one of our customers. In this case, they have a cauliflower mixed with some other vegetables, and that's the main portion of the dip. Some low-calorie dressings as well in order to accompany the salads. And well, the hummus would be the case of the new avocado. So it's a good demand or a large demand for these type of products, which are made out of cooked chickpeas mixed with olive oil dressings. And right now, well, Ithaca hummus is one of the fastest growing in the market. And it has also diversified into other type of dips, such as this developed by Hope, which consists of cashew, almonds, and other grain dips that are available in the market. So in terms of other fruits and vegetables, the first commercial application in the world was actually for citrus jams in Japan. Nowadays, these type of jams or products are better suited or commercialized towards baby foods, and you can see both presentations in terms of spout pouches or tubs. Over here, they incorporate a solid spoon after HPP so that the infant can actually start training himself, herself in terms of eating the product. You can also have snacks for adults, in this case, the same presentations in terms of the puree. This company from Mexico has the citrus portions, the fresh cut vegetables or fruits in this case. They immerse it in their own juice or within another water solution containing citric acid, sucrose, some other components that can also help to further extend the shelf life. And this way they commercialize this over there to the Asian market, but that will be another possibility. Lately, there's also been great interest in terms of desserts made out of soaked oats, and this will be the case of Mosh, another of our customers and one fast-growing company. In terms of the juices and beverages, well, you see that it's nearly 25% of the market for these sort of products, and for the most well-known fruit and vegetables combinations, you have a little bit of everything, every color within the rainbow, everything from single juices out of orange, grapefruit, apple, all the way to those blends that incorporate kale, some green leaves that are very sensitive to heat, but that can be preserved with HPP technology, and again achieving between 60 to 120 days shelf life if kept refrigerated. It's not only the juices, but you can also include some part of the puree or of the fruit. You can incorporate seeds as well for smoothies or thicker beverages, which will be the case of the gazpacho, which is a cold tomato soup original from Spain and now available throughout the world. You have plant-based dairy alternatives, almond milk, cashew, pecan. Microorganisms is perhaps the most important producer around the world in terms of this particular category. And you can also find some interesting applications in terms of cold infused teas and coffees. Now going into the meat or animal derived products. Well, right here in the USA, there was actually a very big crisis in the late 1990s in terms of listeriosis outbreaks related to the consumption of deli meats, sliced ham, sausages, and in this case, HPP came into the scene over here in the USA and in Europe in the development of high quality products such as, well, we talked about the salami, dry cured hams, we even have a foie, and again, very delicate products that if you heat them or apply chemical preservatives, perhaps you can heat them, you can modify the nutritional and sensory properties. Chemical preservatives, customers are always looking for clean label foods, and HPP can help you meet both with minimal impact in their properties. So again, we have a little bit of everything. Sliced deli meats made out of pork, turkey, pre-cooked diced chicken, and the other premium quality meats that I already mentioned. Raw meats can also be done, but you will induce a color change that it's still hard to make consumers to take into account as favorable. But well, all other properties remain the same. And as of now, well, Erdogan talked about is how there's a demand for fresh pet food products that basically consist of raw meat, meat organs mixed up with cereals, vegetables, fruits, all components required to meet the nutritional requirements by pets. And well, HPP came into the scene or comes into the scene as a promising alternative to minimize risk with foodborne pathogens. So you can apply this for the fresh foods and store them either refrigerated or frozen. It can also be used as a pre-step before going into the freeze drying, because well, the pathogens can survive the freeze drying effect. So you apply HPP, immediately run them over for the freeze drying, and this will be the case of some presentation like the nuggets, the kibbles, or the patties shown over here in the images. Seafood, well, we have different examples for cooked products over here. This octopus that lasts over 90 days in refrigeration, sold in Europe. Fresh picked pre-cooked crab meat, which lasts barely 7 days in your fridge. With HPP, you eliminate Listeria, Vibrio species, which was also an outbreak a couple of years ago, 2018, if I don't remember well, but you can reach up to 21 to 30 days with, in this case, for the crab meat. Over here, you mix up fresh algae with guacamole, both very sensible to heat intervention, very sensible to microbial spoilage, and over here you can have a very decent shelf life, 45 to 75 days with the HPP. In terms of the fish, well, Vivian talked about a little bit that the HPP can induce the color change. She actually mentioned the example on salmon, which or in the cured salmon, in which the smoked salmon, they had an increase in the lightness. It was more opaque, perhaps a little bit more pink, but it might be better suited in this case for white flesh fish such as cod. So over here, this processor in Europe, in Spain, Bacalao Salcorta, they salt cod that it's caught within the winter in order to make it available throughout the year. Afterwards, well, in order for you to consume, you need to have the cod immersed in cold water several times in order to remove the excess of salt. But that can pose a threat, because if water or if the cod is not properly handled, you can induce actually pathogens within the cod. In this case, the company, they dissolved the cod, applied HPP, and before that, well, before HPP, they had a shelf life of around 21 days using chemical preservatives in combination with modified atmosphere packaging. With HPP, they are getting between 40 to 50-day shelf life with any further barriers aside from the HPP. And this will be the case for another company over there in France, which also sells cod fresh fillets with around a 21-day shelf life. Going along with the seafood, well, it's what this is perhaps the most visually impactful applications for the HPP industry, and one of the favorite trials. Again, the easy removal of the edible portion of oysters or lobsters. You can see over here that the oyster that has been hand shucked with a knife, it can be actually dangerous, and you can, for yourself, you can pierce through your hand and you can damage. Over here you can see the muscle. With HPP, it just basically comes apart so easily that sometimes processors just wrap the oysters around with plastic rubber bands in order to prevent the meat from falling. And you can see over here also the 100% recovery of the claws. Just chuck the lobster's tails over here for the consumer to easily detach in their homes as well. In terms of ready meals, you have a little bit of everything, very combining well beef, chicken, fish with the main portions and the proteins over here with the sides, which can be grains such as cereals, vegetables, purely based plant-based products as well. You have pasta, chunky soups that contain also solids, so you have quite a variety of products available in the market. And for dairy, well, Gideon talked about this, that it's mainly being used for the shelf life extension of cheeses. But in Mexico and in Australia, there are a couple of companies that are doing this for fresh milk. Over here in the USA, the regulations are kind of strict. So right now it's not allowed. We also do not recommend precisely for the HPP fresh milk because pathogens might survive, in this case in the milk system. Both companies rely on very strict hygienic measures in order to monitor the presence before the HPP. And again, even though we can lower down, it's hard to consistently achieve, in example, 5 log reductions of listeria. So, but it can actually be done when you combine high pressure with mild temperature, which is also being done by another company in Australia, and something that Hyperbaric is actually working, the combination of high pressure with mild temperature, or even bring up the sterilization, the high pressure sterilization, where you reach up to 250 Fahrenheit with HPP vessels. So that will be coming over here in the future. Last but not least, we'll just mention quickly about the HPP tolling. Again, it's basically companies that acquire several of their other equipments and then provide that service to other parties, small companies that may not have the capital to invest in one of these units. And well, they can also provide a co-packing or other distribution and logistics services. So right now, this has been all by my side. That you can contact us, reach out to us in any part of the world. In the headquarters of Spain, you can come over to our facilities in the USA to make trials free of charge. And this is where we actually make the trials in collaboration with Merrick's NutriSciences, which so far has been great. And you can see that both Erdogan and Gillian are very professional, and we are glad to be participating in the shelf life and validation studies with them. And well, just in case that you have any questions, that I am only part of the Hyperbaric applications department, in which we provide guidance, everything related to food processing, packaging, validation for customers and potential buyers. So feel free to reach out. So I hand over the reins back to Amanda so that we can get started with a Q&A session. Thanks again for the invitation, and attendees for going over with the presentation.
Thank you, Benicio, and our other presenters, Dr. Gillian and Dr. Duan. Great presentation today. We are a little over time, so we are going to have to follow up on our questions via email. So if you did answer a question in the chat box, we will get to you and follow up on your question with an answer via email. I want to thank everyone for participating, our panelists, great job. I want to thank all of our attendees for coming. We really appreciate the time you spent with us today. As a final reminder, a copy of the recording of this webinar will be provided to you within the next few days, along with those follow-up answers to your questions. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Have a great day.
Thank you.